Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to a new episode of our Letter to Voxes podcast. Today, we're undertaking a deep dive into the work of a philosopher who has this reputation for being just relentlessly gloomy.
The ultimate pessimist, right?
Exactly. But what's so fascinating is that he actually provides one of those intellectually satisfying, one of the most unified accounts of human suffering, reality, and even those fleeting moments of joy.
We are definitely stepping deep into a vast system.
We are. We're talking about Arthur Schopenhauer.
A really pivotal figure. I mean, his ideas had this profound influence on people like Nietzsche, Wagner, Freud, countless artists and writers.
Absolutely.
So our mission today is to, crack open his definitive work, The World as Will and Representation, and really trace the thread of his central unifying concept.
The will.
The will, or will in German. It's the one idea that connects everything, from the deepest roots of reality, his metaphysics, to how we should act, his ethics, and even why art moves us, his aesthetics.
It's the skeleton key.
It really is. If you can understand the will, you can unlock his entire worldview.
And it is a worldview that is, well, it's both breathtakingly coherent and, frankly, a little terrifying.
Oh, definitely.
And just for clarity, speaking of clarity, we'll be using the pronunciation Arthur Schopenhauer throughout our discussion today. So get ready, because we are about to unpack a system that basically argues existence itself is a mistake.
But somehow finds these incredible pockets of transcendental beauty right in the middle of that mistake.
So before we get completely lost in the metaphysics, let's try to ground ourselves a bit with the man who built this edifice of brilliant despair.
Good idea.
Arthur Schopenhauer was born on February 22, 1788 in Danzig, which at the time was part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth.
And he was born into privilege, real wealth, which kind of adds this extra layer of irony to his later rejection of worldly striving.
It really does. His family background is so crucial for understanding him, isn't it?
It's everything. His parents, Heinrich Flores and Johanna Schopenhauer, they were part of this wealthy German patrician class. Very cosmopolitan.
Anglophiles, I read. Big fans of England.
Huge Anglophiles, Republican in their politics, and, this is key, while they were Protestant, they were not religiously devout at all.
So there was no inherited dogma.
Exactly. It gave Arthur the sort of intellectual space he needed to build this radical, completely non-theistic system from the ground up.
And his father, Heinrich, he made this massive political statement that really changed the family's whole life.
Right. When Danzig was absorbed by Prussia in 1793.
They just left. They immediately moved to Hamburg. They gave up their ancestral home simply because Hamburg was a free Republican city.
That's a powerful commitment. That kind of fierce intellectual independence, you can see it running right through Arthur's later work.
No question. That independence was, well, it was essential, especially when you look at his home life.
Which was turbulent.
To say the least. The intellectual environment was stimulating, sure, but his personal relationships were just a mess. His father wanted him to become a merchant.
And their relationship was really fraught. It ended with Heinrich's untimely death, which just cast this shadow over everything.
And this all leads to what Schopenhauer himself later called a major misstep in his youth.
The choice his father gave him.
Right. The choice was prepare for university right now or go on this extended trip, travel, and get trained up for the mercantile life.
And tempted by the travel, he chose the merchant's path.
A choice he came to deeply, deeply regret.
You can just feel the frustration. The merchant training was just tedious and profoundly unsatisfying for him.
Yeah.
You see this pattern emerging, a man with this incredibly rich, intense internal life, but his external life was just constrained, boring.
It sets the stage perfectly for a philosophy that sees the entire worldly life as inherently lacking something.
And his critiques, even when he was young, they were so sharp, so opinionated.
Like during his stay in London for school in Wimbledon, of all places.
Right.
Despite being a general Anglophile, he just slammed the intellectual Anglicans he met there. He called them shallow.
It's like he had an allergy to anything he saw as superficial or based on rote dogma instead of, genuine insight. He was always the outsider looking in, judging.
That kind of adversarial stance really solidified after his father's death when he finally got to university. He moved to Weimar, and his mother, Johanna, she started running this hugely popular literary salon.
And Arthur, the intense, isolated philosopher, just did not fit in.
Not at all. He instantly clashed with the social lightness of his mother's world. They feuded famously, which led to this profound, permanent estrangement.
He became the solitary, uncompromising genius that his philosophy almost suggests is the ideal state to be in.
So you have this picture. An intellectually gifted, wealthy, but emotionally pretty isolated man who just viewed the conventional world with so much suspicion.
And that personality directly informs the staggering intellectual preparation he demanded from his readers. He was not writing for just anyone. He presupposes, first and foremost, that his reader has a complete knowledge of Kant's philosophy. His whole work is a response to Kant, an evolution of Kant, a critique of the Kantian framework.
So if you don't know Kant's distinction between the phenomenal world, what we experience, and the noumenal world, the thing in itself, you're lost before you even start.
You've missed the starting line. And it's not just modern German philosophy. He also hammers on the critical importance of Plato.
Right, he praises Plato constantly. He saw studying the Platonic theory of forms or ideas as essential preparation for understanding his ideas. He was trying to connect his system all the way back.
But the truly revolutionary part, the synthesis that comes from the East,
Which was so new at the time.
incredibly new. Schopenhauer, writing in the early 19th century, he had access to Sanskrit literature and the Upanishads, the ancient Hindu scriptures, which were just starting to become available in translation.
Now, he saw this as a huge deal.
He called their availability the chief advantage that this still young century enjoys over the previous one. He expected it would have a profound influence on the West.
That's just remarkable. He's basically claiming that the metaphysical conclusions he reached through pure logic, Plato plus Kant, were confirmed and deepened by the ancient spiritual wisdom of India.
For him, they weren't just interesting texts. They were direct, undeniable confirmation of his own conclusions about suffering and illusion. His entire system is this incredible tripod. You've got Platonic ideas for the forms, Kant for the structure of knowledge, and the Upanishads for the spiritual context of suffering.
And with that, I think we have the tools. We're ready to unlock the world as will and representation. Okay, so let's jump right into that foundational division of reality, which is right there in the title of his masterpiece. Schopenhauer declares the world consists of two necessary inseparable halves.
The subject, the knower, and the object, the known.
Or the representation, or Stelling.
This is the world as appearance, the phenomenal world. The world only exists because there is a subject to cognize it and an object to be cognized. They're inextricably linked. One cannot exist without the other.
This immediately echoes Kant, right?
Yeah.
The phenomenal world, the world we experience through our senses, and that's structured by our intellect.
It's pure Kant so far, but Kant said the noumenon, the thing in itself behind all that appearance, was fundamentally unknowable.
And this is where Schopenhauer makes his radical move.
He does. He basically claims Kant was brilliant, but just too cautious. Schopenhauer declares that the thing in itself, the inner essence of the world that underlies all representation, it is knowable.
And it is.
It is will, this single, blind, underlying force that manifests in every single object and phenomenon, including our own bodies and minds.
So it's the one substance of everything.
The one substance. And because it's the thing in itself, it exists entirely outside the forms of representation. It's outside space, outside time, outside of multiplicity.
That's a huge, almost audacious claim. If it's not governed by space and time, what is this will? It has to be more than just, my conscious desire to have a cup of coffee.
So much more. Forget your conscious intentions for a moment. This is metaphysical voluntarism in its purest form. It's the raw, blind, illogical, and fundamentally directionless striving towards existence.
What he calls the will to life.
Der Wille zum Leben, yes. It's the primordial energy driving everything. The magnetic pull of iron, the growth of a tree root, the heartbeat of an animal, the desire for food or survival.
It's all just the one will.
All of it. It's the one single will manifesting or objectifying itself at different levels.
I have to pause here. This whole metaphysical system, it feels entirely unprovable. How does Schopenhauer get around the charge that he's just swapped Kant's unknowable X for his own arbitrary will Y without any real justification?
That's a very fair question, and his answer is actually brilliant. He says we don't need external proof because we experience the will directly, internally. He argues that Kant, while he correctly identified the separation, he failed to notice the one unique point where the phenomenon and the noumenon, the representation and the will, they overlap perfectly.
And that's our own body.
Our own body, it's the key.
Okay, let's unpack that. The body is the key.
We cognize our body in a double way. First, externally, as a representation. It's an object, among other objects, subject to physical laws, space, and time.
I see my hand. I can touch it. It's an object.
Exactly. But second, internally, we experience our motivated actions and our impulses immediately. What we perceive externally as our body's action, say reaching for a cup, is precisely and simultaneously what we perceive internally as an act of will, the desire for the cup.
So they're not cause and effect, they're two sides of the same coin.
Identical. They are one and the same reality, just differing in our mode of perception. This unique, twofold cognition of our own body it's the Rosetta Stone for his whole system.
So we use this internal knowledge to understand the rest of the world.
We use it as an analogy. If our body, which is a representation, has an inner essence that we know is will, then all other representations, gravity, rocks, plants, must also have an inner essence that is identical in kind to our will, differing only in degree.
So gravity is just the will objectifying itself at its lowest, most basic level.
Precisest, and that explains the metaphysics. But now let's look at the immediate, terrible consequences of living in a world that's defined by this ceaseless striving.
If the will is fundamentally eternal becoming, endless flux, what does that mean for human happiness?
It means happiness is an illusion. It's a temporary state of relief, nothing more. The will is inherently characterized by lack, and lack is pain. We desire something, that is pain. We achieve it, that is satisfaction.
But the satisfaction is instantly the beginning of a new desire.
A new striving, and so on to infinity. The entire human existence is just oscillating violently between lack and satiety.
Happiness is just the rapid course of misery. That is a brutal definition.
He states that the slow course of this whole game is what we call suffering. Happiness, as we conventionally define it, is just the rapid passing from desire to satisfaction to a new desire. But the striving itself never, ever ends.
It's like the myth of Sisyphus on a loop, just forever pushing the rock up the hill, only to watch it roll down again.
That's a perfect image for it.
But what happens when the striving stops? When the will temporarily has nothing to grasp onto?
That's the other philosophical horror. Boredom. If pain is the positive state caused by lack, boredom is the negative state. It's the fear of the game ending. It's a fearful, life-destroying boredom, a wearied longing without a definite object, a deadening languor.
So we strive frantically, not even for the goal necessarily, but just to escape the profound existential emptiness that comes from not striving.
Exactly. Our life flows absolutely between these two poles. Pain on one side, from lack, and boredom on the other, from satiety.
It sounds incredibly cyclical. An inescapable natural law of misery just imposed by the structure of reality itself.
And the order we see in the phenomenal world, the representation, is maintained entirely by the principle of sufficient reason, the PSR.
This is the law that dictates all the relationships in the world of appearance. Cause and effect, position in space, sequence in time.
All of it. Schopenhauer detailed 4 specific forms this principle takes, but the main takeaway is that the PSR determines how things relate to each other, but it never tells you what they are internally. It just imposes order on the will's manifestations.
So the PSR is like the grammatical structure of the universe, but the will is the raw vocabulary.
Precisely, a perfect way to put it. And this brings us back to his critique of Kant. Schopenhauer argues that while Kant was right that our minds structure the phenomenal world, Kant failed to properly distinguish between intuitive cognition and conceptual cognition.
Right. Kant suggested that intuition without a concept is empty.
And Schopenhauer says that is the complete opposite of the truth. He argues that concepts are derived entirely from intuitive experience. They are representations of representations.
So intuition, that immediate sensory grasp of reality, is the only real source of meaning. And concepts, if you cut them off from intuition, they just become dry, empty husks.
Yes. Schopenhauer felt Kant's system was just overly complex sometimes, driven by a desire for, a neat symmetrical structure.
Like filling out a table just for the sake of it.
Exactly, rather than what was empirically or intuitively necessary. Schopenhauer wants to simplify and unify that whole structure using the will.
Let's go back to the world of appearance for a second and look at matter. How does matter connect the timeless will to the temporal representation?
Matter is the great unifier, and its essence for Schopenhauer is defined as action, or causality. Matter is what reconciles 2 necessary conditions of the phenomenal world, the fleeting course of time and the rigid persistence of space.
So without matter, the world would be either just frozen and rigid, pure space, or entirely momentary, pure time.
Exactly. Matter, by unifying them, makes duration possible.
Duration. Persistence against constant change.
Yeah.
So matter gives the phenomenal world the stability it needs for the will to fully objectify itself.
Correct. It's the vehicle for the will to act out its striving across time and space.
Yeah.
Now, when physicists study matter, they describe laws. the how of phenomena, which follows the PSR. They can tell you how objects fall, how heat transfers.
But they can't tell you why gravity exists or what heat fundamentally is, just the rules it follows.
Exactly. The forces themselves, gravity, cohesion, electricity, vegetative growth, the determinate manner in which things act, their quality, their character, all that remains completely unexplained by science.
He calls them occult qualities.
Occult qualities, or the ungrounded. Science can't answer the what or the why of these forces, only the how.
And since we use our body as the key, knowing our will is the inner essence of our body,
We realize that these occult qualities are simply the manifestation of the one single directionless will at different levels of objectification. It all connects back to that one core concept. The entire universe is embodied will, perpetually striving and perpetually suffering the consequences.
okay, so if the will is the cosmic engine of reality and its nature is this ceaseless striving, then it's Creforing. It's crystal clear why Schopenhauer believes suffering isn't an accident of life.
It's the essential ingredient.
And his whole ethics stems directly from understanding this metaphysical reality.
Suffering is the moral outcome of affirming the will to life. If you say yes to existence, you are saying yes to that pain-boredom pendulum. And he saw this fundamental truth encoded in ancient wisdom traditions all over the world.
He connects it directly to the Christian dogma of original sin, the idea that existence itself is flawed, and also the Eastern dogma of rebirth.
Right, that the cycle of striving just ensures continuous suffering.
Both of those doctrines, they imply that just being born, just affirming the will, is inseparably connected with some kind of inherent fault or misery. The cycle of life and death just keeps renewing this striving.
Birth and death are reciprocal conditions of life.
Which brings up the essential question of mortality. I mean, if life is inherently suffering, why shouldn't a person just opt out? Does suicide offer any kind of escape?
Schopenhauer is absolutely, adamantly against suicide. He calls it philosophically futile.
Why futile?
Because suicide only negates the temporary individual appearance. The will itself, that single, timeless, immortal essence underlying the manifestation, it remains completely untouched.
So it'll just manifest again in another form.
It will simply manifest again. Suicide is the will affirming itself violently against a specific intolerable form of suffering.
Yep.
It destroys the individual, but not the species, and certainly not the cosmic striving.
He uses the Hindu Trimurtis to make this point, right? Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer.
Yes. The will is preserved just as much in the destructive act of suicide as it is in the act of procreation. It's just the will turning its immense force against its own temporary manifestation. It's a masterpiece of Maya, or illusion.
And this realization introduces what he calls the greatest illusion of all, the one that underpins all conflict and all egoism.
The principium individuationis, the principle of individuation.
Let's slow down and really explain this term. It's a dense one, but it's so important.
It's central. The principium individuationis is the veil of Maya, the illusion, that's imposed by the forms of our cognition, space, and time.
It's what makes us see ourselves as separate individuals, distinct from others.
Exactly. The individual sits there comfortably in their own world, trusting this principle, believing that their pleasure and their suffering are totally separate from the suffering of the world. They see the torturer and the tormented as fundamentally distinct beings.
So we're all kind of like puppets in a show. And the principium individuationis is the curtain separating the puppets, making them unaware that they're all being operated by the same underlying hand.
The will, that's a great metaphor for it. But genuine ethical insight, for Schopenhauer, is achieved only when that curtain is torn down.
When you see the truth.
When deep metaphysical cognition reveals the horrific truth that all the misery experienced and all the misery inflicted affects one and the same being. The will.
The tormentor and the tormented are one essence. They just differ phenomenally.
They are one. And this changes everything about morality. If the will, in its violence, is simply sinking its teeth into its own flesh, then acting purely out of egoism is, well, it's fundamentally self-destructive in a metaphysical sense.
This completely reframes how we define ethical action.
It does. Good becomes fundamentally relative. It's just the suitability of an object to any particular effort of the will. You know, good food, a good outcome, things we desire.
But evil.
Evil, or Boschheit, is the affirmation of the will to life taken to such an extreme that it actually negates the wills that are appearing in others. It's high egoism.
So the evil person demands that other people exist solely to serve his striving.
Or that they be eradicated if they oppose him. And cruelty is the ultimate expression of this inverted, self-negating high egoism.
How does that work?
Cruelty arises when an individual is so overwhelmed by their own internal suffering, the chronic, unquenchable impulses of the will, that they seek to mitigate this inner pain by witnessing the suffering of others.
So the sight of another person's pain becomes an end in itself.
A perverse expression of their phenomenal power over the unity of the will.
So then, conversely, how does true virtue, justice, and compassion emerge from this unified vision?
Justice comes from seeing through the principium individuationis to a lesser degree. It recognizes the phenomenal separation but respects boundaries. It's acting from the recognition that you shouldn't cause harm to another because that harm ultimately recoils back onto the single will.
But genuine goodness, compassion, is a step beyond that.
It's a much higher degree of insight. Unselfish love or compassion is what stems from completely equating the other individual and their fate with one's own.
So once you truly see that the other person is you, in essence.
There is no logical ground left for preferring your own happiness over theirs.
This philosophical determinism, it brings us to that famous contradiction between freedom and necessity. I mean, if my actions are just manifestations of the will, am I free at all?
This is where Schopenhauer offers his really rigorous synthesis. As an object or appearance, the person we see in time and space, a thing, is thoroughly necessary.
Completely determined.
Entirely determined by the chain of causality and the principle of sufficient reason. Every single action is determined by a motive acting on a pre-existing character. There are zero exceptions in the phenomenal world.
But our essence, the thing in itself, is free.
Yes. As will, the thing in itself, it is completely free for all eternity. Freedom is simply the negation of necessity. It resides in the extratemporal realm of the will itself.
So freedom only exists before we enter the world of time and space.
Exactly. The will makes what he calls an intelligible character, which is an extratemporal, indivisible, free act of will that determines the ethical content of one's entire life.
And the empirical character
is that free act developed and displayed over time through our actions. Once you are born with that character, your actions are absolutely necessary.
which implies that, well, I can refine my actions, but I can't fundamentally change who I am.
You have hit the nail on the head. Cognition, motives, abstract concepts, they can alter the direction of your will. You can choose a wiser way to pursue your goals.
But I can't alter the fundamental character, the strength of the will itself.
It's fixed. The core of what you will is locked in. His famous Latin phrase captures this perfectly. Vel non deciter.
Willing cannot be taught.
You can only learn what you are willed to do, but you cannot learn to will differently at the core level.
That's a profoundly fixed, almost fatalistic ethical framework. You can correct your errors in judgment, but the deep underlying impulse that defines your nature is just. It's locked in place.
And that leads directly to the path of quietism. If the will is fixed, and if existence is suffering, the only genuine metaphysical escape is to stop the will entirely.
Okay, we've covered the fixed nature of character and the necessity of suffering. Before we move on to Schopenhauer's solution, the final escape, let's just take a moment. We know you're following along deeply in this complex system, and we really appreciate your time and attention. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoy this podcast. Welcome back. We left off with this seemingly intractable problem. Character is fixed, and existence is suffering. Schopenhauer's ultimate solution, quietism, requires the restless will to become tranquilized.
And this tranquility, it demands a level of deep metaphysical insight that completely annihilates the illusion of individuality, that principium individuationis.
So the wise person, having understood that suffering is just the necessary outcome of the will,
They cease to fight merely for the happiness of their own individual temporary manifestation.
the will has to essentially recoil from pursuing its own goals.
Yes. It is the will's self-negation, or self-abolition. The individual stops striving, their sense of individuality weakens, and the goals of the will are just abandoned.
And this leads to a state of profound serenity.
A state that is void of the usual pains of existence precisely because the subject is void of striving. They've lost the usual egoistic sense of self. It's a state you achieve either through overwhelming suffering, a path of anguish, or through pure cognition, a path of insight.
This brings us right back to that Eastern connection. Schopenhauer must have been thrilled that his cold, logical path led to the same spiritual conclusions reached thousands of years earlier.
Oh, he was. He noted the powerful correspondence between his entire doctrine and the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism.
Life involves suffering. Suffering is caused by desire.
And the extinction of desire leads to liberation, or nirvana. Schopenhauer's system maps directly onto this. The will is desire, existence is suffering, and the negation of the will is liberation.
That cross-cultural agreement must have really strengthened his conviction that he had found a singular underlying truth about the cosmos.
Without a doubt.
So the complete negation of the will is the final solution, but it's a difficult, maybe even a rare path to take.
Very rare.
But Schopenhauer offers another more accessible temporary salvation, the blissful escape found in pure aesthetic contemplation.
And to get there, we have to revisit that distinction between intuition and concept.
Right. As we established, intuition is that pure, immediate sensory apprehension of reality.
It's the non-abstract grasp. It's clear, stable, and certain, and sufficient unto itself. It's the meaningful bedrock of all our thought. Concepts, on the other hand, are abstract, discursive. They're just categories we use to organize intuition. They're tools.
And the ordinary person just rushes straight past the intuitive grasp. They're only looking for the concept or the category to satisfy the will's need to label things and use them.
They don't linger in contemplation. Their cognitive faculty is purely in service of the will. But the genius is the exception.
This is the rare individual with an excess of cognitive power.
So great that their intellect can be temporarily withdrawn from the service of the will. They're free to observe the world not as a source of motives for their own striving, but as an object of pure contemplation.
The contrast he draws here is beautiful. For the ordinary person, the intellect is just a lantern that lights the way. It serves immediate needs.
But for the genius, it is the sun that reveals the world. It illuminates the world for its own sake.
And that detachment provides this temporary, will-less, painless bliss. The genius observes life, grasps the idea of things, the Platonic eternal form, rather than just focusing on the practical relations or the utility of the thing.
Right. And while they might seem clumsy in their own life because they're so mentally withdrawn, for that moment, they are momentarily free from the suffering of the will.
Speaking of immediate, almost visceral moments of cognition, Schopenhauer's analysis of laughter is fascinating. It shows cognition at work, even in something as simple as a punchline.
Laughter is purely cognitive for him. It arises from the sudden, powerful perception of an incongruity between an abstract concept and the real objects thought through that concept.
Can you give an example?
Sure. If I tell a story that makes you form an abstract expectation in your mind, let's call it A, and then the punchline immediately delivers a real intuitive situation B that is totally different from A but still technically fits under the same initial concept, that shock releases tension as laughter.
So it's the mismatch between the rigidity of our abstract thought and the messy, surprising reality of the intuitive world.
Yes, and the more unexpected that incongruity, the funnier the ridiculous effect. It just demonstrates how our reasoning is constantly at work, even when we think we're just being entertained.
Now, let's move to aesthetics, the pinnacle of this temporary will-less escape. The ultimate object of art is not the individual fleeting thing.
Which is governed by the PSR.
Right. It's the idea, the eternal form, which is the immediate objectification of the will at a specific level, free from the constraints of space, time, and causality.
And for the subject of art to appreciate this, they have to completely transform themselves. The individual must become the pure, will-less, painless, timeless subject of cognition.
They have to lose their individuality and their own desires completely in the act of contemplation.
Consciousness becomes entirely engrossed by the single intuitive image, the idea. At that moment, the world as representation is still there, but the burden of the world as will has temporarily vanished. This is aesthetic rapture.
And Schopenhauer analyzes the arts in this hierarchy, based on what level of the will's objecthood they capture. Let's start at the bottom of the visible hierarchy, architecture.
Architecture, as a fine art, is focused on the lowest visible level of the will's objecthood, that fundamental universal struggle between gravity and rigidity.
The sounds of the ground base of nature.
A great phrase. The architect's task is to make this struggle come forth with complete clarity and beauty.
How does a building express that struggle?
Well, think about a column supporting a massive beam. Gravity, that blind, relentless, striving force of the will, is constantly pushing down. Rigidity, the counterforce within the stone, is resisting that pressure.
So the architect isn't fighting gravity.
They're harnessing it. They're detaining these forces along a detour. The column, in its massive, elegant tension, it prolongs the visible struggle, making the will's inexhaustible striving visible in a pure, eternal idea. A poorly designed building fails to express this tension. A great cathedral makes it palpable.
Moving up the hierarchy, we get to poetry, which deals with the ideas of humanity.
Poetry's great subject matter is the revelation of the idea of humanity itself. Schopenhauer contrasts poetry really sharply with history.
History gives us the truth of appearance, empirical facts, relations, consequences. It tells you what Napoleon did.
But poetry gives you the truth of the idea. It isolates the essential inner character of humanity outside of all time and relation.
So poetry selects characters and situations that clearly illustrate the universal idea of man, the tragic lover, the relentless striver, the selfless hero. An essence you can't find perfectly in any single historical person, but that speaks out of all of them.
That's the distinction perfectly. Poetry uses the imagination to strip away all the accidental noise of space and time and reveal the timeless, fundamental truths of human willing. It's the philosopher's art form.
And finally, he places music in a completely unique category, distinguishing it from all the other arts.
This is maybe his most revolutionary aesthetic claim. Music is not a copy of appearance, nor is it a copy of the ideas. Instead, music is a direct copy of the will itself. It completely bypasses the phenomenal world.
Which would explain why music can feel so immediately profound and emotionally resonant, but it's impossible to translate into concepts.
Exactly. Music presents the metaphysical in all that is physical in the world. It's the will's primal language. Its universality is unique. It's not the empty universality of abstract concepts, but a definite, clear-cut universality, almost like numbers or geometric figures.
So it can express every possible excitation of the will, joy, grief, desire, relief.
But only in the universality of mere form, without the matter or the context of the physical world.
So we feel the structure of our deepest yearning without being able to name the object of that yearning, the inner soul of life without the body.
A symphony, for instance, can seem to disclose the most secret sense of life's events. It maps the arc of human striving and sorrow perfectly, without establishing any specific point of similarity between the notes and the actual events we have in mind. It is a direct revelation of the ungrounded will.
While the metaphysical and aesthetic systems of Arthur Schopenhauer are, well, they're profoundly unified, we do have to, as required, impartially report on certain aspects of his writings and life that are deeply controversial or problematic.
To give the full picture of the man and his thought, yes.
We've already touched on his foundational but deeply critical relationship with Immanuel Kant.
Right. He treated Kant with immense respect as a predecessor, but he also felt Kant failed to draw the necessary conclusions from his own work, specifically about separating intuitive and conceptual thought.
Schopenhauer believed Kant's error suggesting intuition without a concept is empty was the exact opposite of the truth.
For Schopenhauer, concepts need intuition to have any content, not the other way around. He saw Kant as intellectually constrained by this need for systematic symmetry. It highlights Schopenhauer's general character, a brilliant synthesizer who just tolerated no perceived error, even from the man he considered the greatest philosopher since Plato.
The other, and perhaps most difficult subject we have to address, is his views on women, which he presented in his 1851 essay on women.
And it is crucial that we report these views directly from the source material without endorsing or condemning them, just presenting the documented content of his arguments.
He expressed strong opposition to what he called the Teutonico-Christian stupidity of reflexive, unexamined reverence for the female.
He stated that women are, and I'm quoting, childish, frivolous, and short-sighted. In a word, they are big children all their life long, a kind of intermediate stage between the child and the full-grown man.
He also critiqued their capacities for art and justice.
Yes, he opined they are deficient in artistic faculties and in their sense of justice. And he made the explicit claim that woman is by nature meant to obey.
He viewed their existence almost entirely through the lens of species preservation.
He did, arguing that once their function for reproduction is complete, their value diminishes significantly. This led him to vehemently oppose monogamy, which he saw as an unnatural restraint.
Interestingly, even within this very prejudiced essay, the sources do point out some, well, contradictory observations.
That's correct. He does write that women are decidedly more sober in their judgment than men are, and he notes that they are generally more sympathetic and compassionate toward the suffering of others, perhaps because of their more intuitive nature. But these sporadic observations really do little to mitigate the deeply sexist foundation of the overall argument. It's rooted in a fundamental misapplication of his own metaphysical principles to gender roles. We present these views as an inherent part of his published work, essential for a complete understanding of the man, complex and flawed as he was.
So to conclude our deep dive into Arthur Schopenhauer's unified philosophical system, let's quickly summarize the 5 pillars that really define his cosmic view, the takeaways that can help you unlock his thought.
First, the world is fundamentally split into representation, the phenomenal world, structured by space and time and will, which is that single, ungrounded, blind, ceaseless striving essence, the thing in itself.
Second, life is intrinsically defined by suffering.
Because the will is eternal striving, which leads to that miserable oscillation between the pain of lack and the existential boredom of satiety.
Third, genuine ethical acts, justice and especially compassion, are born from penetrating the illusion of individual separation.
Seeing through the principium individuationis and recognizing that the tormented and the tormentor are, in essence, one and the same.
Fourth, ultimate salvation lies in the negation of the will.
Quietism, a profound metaphysical insight or ascetic path that mirrors the Buddhist extinction of desire, leading to a state of will-less serenity.
And fifth, art and pure cognition offer a temporary blissful respite from suffering.
By allowing the subject to detach from the will and contemplate the eternal, timeless idea.
It's a stunning, meticulously crafted system, one that argues the ultimate truth of the universe is just this restless, chaotic force. It forces you to look at every act of living, every movement, every desire, as part of this unredeemed cosmic struggle.
And that leads us back to that moment of philosophical vertigo that Schopenhauer observed in all human beings. He notes that we all share an indelible dread, this sudden, irrational anxiety that seizes us when a chance event, a moment of profound recognition, momentarily confuses the principium individuationis.
That feeling when the illusion of separation gets thin.
It gets thin, and this fleeting, sharp dread suggests that deep down we instinctively recognize that the boundless world of pain and suffering is not foreign to us, but is inextricably linked to our own essence.
So if that illusion is the basis of our everyday comfort, where else in your own life, in a dream, a moment of profound shock or unexpected empathy, do you experience this sudden, hidden dread, this brief and terrible awareness of your essential unity with all the suffering, relentless will? Something to ponder until our next deep dive.